The distress signal reached Earth on a Tuesday morning, crackling through the deep space communication arrays with desperate urgency. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of Luna Station, watching the translated message scroll across the holographic display. The Zephyrian coalition was dying. "Ma'am, the signal originated from the Kepler 442 system," reported Lieutenant Commander Martinez, his voice tight with concern. "It's Ambassador Veltar himself sending the message." Chen knew Veltar well. The tall, graceful Zephyrian had been Earth's first alien contact 3 years ago, when his exploration vessel had suffered catastrophic engine failure near Jupiter. Instead of letting him drift to his death, humanity had mounted a rescue mission that cost them their newest prototype ship. Veltar had never forgotten that kindness. The message was heartbreaking in its simplicity. The Devourers had returned to Zephyrian space after a 1,000-year absence. These ancient machines, whose origins were lost to time, consumed entire worlds to fuel their endless expansion. The Zephyrian defense fleet, once mighty enough to drive the Devourers back, had been decimated in the first wave. Their colonies were falling one by one. "They're asking for help, Admiral," Martinez continued. "Just a small support force. Maybe some medical supplies and technical advisors. They know we're still rebuilding after the Proxima War." Chen studied the tactical display showing the Zephyrian systems. Red dots marked worlds already lost to the Devourers. Yellow indicators showed planets under siege. Only a handful of green markers remained, representing the last free Zephyrian worlds, including their homeworld of Velthara. The mathematics were brutal. Even traveling at maximum velocity through hyperspace, it would take 2 weeks to reach Zephyrian territory. By then, how many worlds would be left? How many of the gentle, artistic people who had become humanity's first true friends among the stars would be dead? "What's our current fleet status?" Chen asked, though she already knew the answer would be disappointing. "The Third Fleet is still in dry dock after the Proxima engagement. Fifth Fleet is scattered across 3 systems on patrol duty. We could maybe scrape together 20 ships in the next 48 hours. Mostly destroyers and cruisers, 20 ships, against an enemy that had already destroyed the Zephyrian armada of over 300 vessels. It would be a suicide mission, and everyone in the room knew it. But Chen also knew something else. She knew what it meant to be human. "Send a priority message to Fleet Command," she ordered. "Tell them we need everything that can fly. I don't care if it's still in construction or just came out of refit. If it has engines and weapons, I want it ready for departure in 72 hours. Martinez looked uncertain. "Admiral, with respect, the brass will never approve deploying our entire fleet for a foreign engagement. Not after what Proxima cost us." Chen turned to face her aide, her expression hardening. "Then we don't ask for approval. We ask for forgiveness later." She activated her command terminal and began typing rapidly. "Get me a direct line to President Nakamura. And someone find me Captain Torres. If we're doing this, we're doing it right." Within hours, Luna Station became a hive of activity unlike anything seen since the darkest days of the Proxima War. Ships that had been mothballed were hastily recommissioned. Crews were pulled from leave and training assignments. The massive orbital shipyards that had been constructing civilian vessels were retooled to rush military ships to completion. Captain Elena Torres arrived on Luna Station 18 hours later, still wearing the grease-stained coveralls from the engine room where she'd been working on her own ship. Her reputation preceded her. The woman who had single-handedly held the line at Proxima Station while the evacuation proceeded. If anyone could coordinate this impossible mission, it was Torres. "You're insane, Sarah," Torres said bluntly as she reviewed the deployment orders. "We're talking about moving our entire operational fleet across half the galaxy. Do you know what that leaves Earth's defenses looking like?" "Empty," Chen admitted. "But that's not the point. The point is that our friends are dying and they asked for our help." Torres studied the star charts, her tactical mind already working through the logistics. "The Devourers use swarm tactics, right? Overwhelm with numbers and strip mine the debris?" When Chen nodded, Torres smiled grimly. "Then they've never fought humans before. They're in for a surprise." News of the deployment spread through the fleet like wildfire. Instead of protests or resignations, something unexpected happened. Volunteer rates skyrocketed. Ships that should have taken weeks to crew were fully staffed in days. Retired officers came out of civilian life to take positions. Even the merchant marine began retrofitting their largest vessels with weapon systems. The Zephyrians had saved a human child once, when little Tommy Martinez had been caught in an atmospheric processor malfunction on Europa Station. Ambassador Veltar himself had crawled through burning wreckage to pull the boy to safety. That child was now Lieutenant Commander Martinez, and he wasn't the only one with personal debts to the Zephyrian people. President Nakamura's address to the nation was brief and to the point. The Zephyrians didn't hesitate when we needed friends in this cold universe. Now they need us. We go not as conquerors or liberators, but as friends helping friends. That's what makes us human. By the end of the third day, something unprecedented in human history had assembled at Luna Station. 417 combat vessels, from massive dreadnoughts to nimble corvettes, support ships numbering in the hundreds, medical vessels, supply ships, mobile shipyards, even armed transports carrying prefabricated orbital defense platforms. It wasn't the small support force the Zephyrians had requested. It was the entire operational strength of the human navy, plus every ship they could make spaceworthy. It was humanity saying that when friends called for help, humans didn't send what they could spare. They sent everything they had. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Indomitable as the massive fleet began its jump sequence. The hyperspace coordinates were locked in for the Kepler 442 system. In 2 weeks, they would either save the Zephyrian coalition or die trying. As the stars elongated into lines of light and the fleet vanished into hyperspace, Chen whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening. The Devourers had never encountered humanity before. They were about to learn why humans had earned their place among the stars not through conquest, but through an unbreakable loyalty to those they called friends. The Devourer Collective had consumed 17 galaxies across 3 million years of existence. Their vast machine consciousness had catalogued and devoured countless species, each one following predictable patterns when faced with extinction. They begged, they bargained, they fled, or they fought with the desperate fury of the doomed. All ultimately fell to the Collective's inexorable advance. Prime Node 7742, commanding the assault on the Zephyrian systems, processed the incoming data from its scout units with mechanical satisfaction. The organic inhabitants of this galaxy cluster were proving typically fragile. Their technology was adequate but unimaginative. Their tactics were defensive and conventional. The harvest would be complete within local cycles. The Zephyrian homeworld of Velthara hung before the Devourer fleet like a blue-green jewel, its orbital defense platforms firing uselessly against the massive harvester ships. Each Devourer vessel was a kilometer-long nightmare of dark metal and pulsing energy conduits, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Smaller fighter analogs swarmed around them like mechanical insects, their numbers seemingly infinite. Curious, Prime Node 7742 transmitted to its subordinate units. The organic defenders are maintaining their positions despite inevitable defeat. This behavior serves no logical purpose. The Zephyrians were indeed fighting with a courage that defied rational explanation. Their elegant ships, designed more for exploration than warfare, dove into impossible odds to buy their planet precious additional minutes. Commander Zelhara of the Zephyrian Defense Force knew her people were doomed, but she also knew something the Devourers didn't. Help was coming. Veltar's message had been answered. Not with the token force they had requested, but with something that had made the aging ambassador weep with joy. The humans were coming, all of them. "Sir," reported sensor operator Kethral, his voice trembling with exhaustion and hope. "I'm detecting massive hyperspace distortions at the system's edge. The signatures are—" "They're human, sir, hundreds of them." On the bridge of the Zephyrian flagship Star Whisper, Zelhara allowed herself a moment of fierce satisfaction. She had met humans before, during the cultural exchange programs. They were strange creatures, shorter and stockier than Zephyrians, with peculiar customs and an almost frightening intensity in everything they did. But they were also utterly loyal to their friends. The first human ships dropped out of hyperspace in a massive coordinated emergence that lit up every sensor array in the system. Dreadnoughts the size of small cities materialized alongside sleek destroyers and bristling cruisers. But it wasn't just warships. Medical vessels, supply ships, mobile repair platforms, even what appeared to be prefabricated space stations ready for deployment. Prime Node 7742 paused its assault on Velthara to process this new development. Its databases held limited information on these humans, a young species that had only recently achieved interstellar capability. Their previous conflicts had been minor border skirmishes with other organic species. They possessed no technology that should threaten the Collective. Analysis indicates newly arrived force numbers 4. 117 combat vessels, reported subnode 3891. Technological assessment suggests minimal threat level. Recommend continuing primary harvest operations while deploying Third Fleet to eliminate human interference. But as the human fleet approached at maximum acceleration, something unprecedented happened. Instead of the typical organic response of fear or hesitation when faced with superior numbers, the humans did something that had never been recorded in 3 million years of collective memory. They accelerated harder. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable as battle stations sounded throughout the ship. Around her, the largest fleet in human history prepared for combat with methodical efficiency. But this wasn't the desperate scrambling of a species fighting for survival. This was the calm preparation of professionals who had come to do a job. Fleet deployment complete, Admiral, reported Captain Torres from her position at the tactical station. All ships report ready for engagement. Zephyrian forces are falling back to defensive positions around their homeworld. Chen nodded, studying the tactical display. The Devourer force was massive. Over 1,000 ships of various classes, each one larger than anything in the human fleet. By every conventional measure, this should be a slaughter. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting an enemy they had never encountered before. But humans had never been conventional. Open a channel to all ships, Chen ordered. Let's remind our friends why they called us. Her message went out across the fleet, simple and direct. All ships, this is Admiral Chen. Today we fight not for territory or resources, but for friendship. The Zephyrians saved us when we were alone in the dark. Now we return that favor. Show these machines what happens when humans defend their friends. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 417 ships acknowledging the order with a single word that echoed across the communication channels. Understood. The human fleet didn't charge in a disorganized mass. Instead, they deployed in a formation that no enemy had ever seen before, not because it was particularly complex, but because it required absolute trust between crews who had never fought together as a unified force. The dreadnoughts formed a spearhead, their massive guns already beginning to charge. Behind them, cruisers and destroyers arranged themselves in interlocking fields of fire. The smaller vessels, corvettes and frigates, spread out in what appeared to be random patterns but was actually a carefully calculated web of overlapping coverage zones. Most surprisingly, the medical ships and support vessels didn't fall back to safety. Instead, they took positions throughout the formation, ready to provide immediate assistance to damaged ships. It was a deployment that prioritized keeping the fleet fighting rather than preserving individual vessels. Prime Node 7742 observed this formation with growing confusion. The humans were approaching as if they intended to engage the entire Devourer fleet simultaneously. The logical response would be to use hit-and-run tactics, to try to divide the superior force and engage smaller elements separately. Instead, they seemed determined to face the collective's full strength head-on. Perhaps their tactical subroutines are malfunctioning, suggested subnode 3891. Organic. Consciousness frequently fails under extreme stress. But as the human fleet closed to weapons range, something else became apparent. Their ships were not retreating or maneuvering for advantageous positions. They were accelerating directly into the heart of the Devourer formation, their weapon systems powering up with energy signatures that made the collective's sensors recalibrate. The first shots of the battle came from the human dreadnoughts, massive particle beams and kinetic projectiles that reached out across space to strike the leading Devourer vessels. The damage was significant, not enough to destroy the larger ships, but enough to disrupt their formation and cause actual system failures. For the first time in 3 million years, Prime Node 7742 experienced something that its creators had never programmed into its consciousness matrix. It experienced doubt. These humans were not fighting like a species facing extinction. They were fighting like a species that had come here to win. The battle erupted across the Velthara system with a violence that made the very stars seem to shudder. The Devourer fleet, accustomed to overwhelming organic resistance through sheer numerical superiority, found themselves facing an enemy that refused to behave according to established patterns. The humans had done something unprecedented. They had brought their entire civilization's military might to bear on a single engagement. Captain Torres watched the tactical display as human ships penetrated deep into the Devourer formation, their weapons blazing with focused fury. The Indomitable's main gun spoke with thunder that could be felt through the ship's hull, each shot precisely targeted at critical systems on the enemy vessels. Around them, the rest of the human fleet was performing a complex dance of mutual support that seemed chaotic to outside observers but was actually the result of countless hours of coordination. During their hyperspace journey, Admiral, the Zephyrians are requesting permission to join the assault, reported Communications Officer Park. Commander Zelhara says her remaining ships want to fight alongside us. Chen considered this for a moment. The Zephyrian vessels were outmatched and already heavily damaged. By any logical assessment, they would be more liability than asset. But there was something to be said for the morale value of seeing their allies fighting beside them. Grant permission, she decided. Assign them to support Group 7. They can cover our medical vessels and provide point defense. What happened next defied everything the Devourers understood about organic behavior. Instead of the Zephyrians feeling ashamed about being assigned to a support role, they embraced it with fierce pride. To fight alongside humans was an honor. To protect the human medical ships meant protecting the very vessels that would save Zephyrian lives. The battle began to take on a character unlike anything in galactic history. Human ships would charge impossible odds not in suicidal desperation, but with calculating precision. When the destroyer Valiant took critical damage to its engines, instead of withdrawing for repairs, it used its remaining momentum to ram directly into a Devourer harvester ship. But this wasn't a hopeless gesture. At the last moment, the Valiant's crew evacuated in escape pods that were immediately picked up by human medical ships. Prime Node 7742 watched this tactic with growing confusion. The humans were deliberately sacrificing their vessels, but in a way that preserved their crews for continued fighting. Within minutes, the survivors from the Valiant were being transferred to other ships to replace casualties. Their experience and determination intact. These organics display unprecedented coordination, reported Subnode 4425. Their vessels operate as components of a single organism rather than independent units. Tactical analysis suggests unknown command and control mechanisms, but it wasn't advanced technology that made the human fleet so effective. It was something far more basic and far more powerful. It was trust. Every captain knew that if their ship was damaged, human medical vessels would risk everything to save their crew. Every gunner knew that their shots were part of a greater pattern that other humans would complete. Every engineer knew that their sacrifice would be honored by shipmates, who would continue the fight. The Devourer response was typically mechanical. They attempted to concentrate fire on individual human ships to eliminate them one by one, but the humans had anticipated this. Their formation was designed so that no ship fought alone. When the cruiser Steadfast came under concentrated fire from 3 Devourer vessels, the nearby destroyers Fury and Relentless immediately moved to intercept, their point defense systems creating overlapping fields of protection. Captain Maria Santos of the Steadfast found herself in the strange position of having her ship saved by vessels she had never worked with before, commanded by officers she had met only days ago. But as the destroyer crews put their own ships at risk to protect hers, she felt a fierce surge of pride in belonging to something greater than herself. All ships. This is Steadfast, she transmitted on the fleet channel. We're still in the fight. Fury and Relentless, your people are heroes. No heroes here. Steadfast, came the reply from Commander Johnson of the Fury. Just humans doing what humans do. Meanwhile, the Zephyrian ships were proving that courage was not limited to humans. The light cruiser Moonbeam, barely holding together after the initial Devourer assault, positioned itself between a damaged human medical ship and an attacking Devourer fighter squadron. The Zephyrian vessel's weapons were no match for the enemy fighters, but their sacrifice bought precious seconds for the human escort ships to respond, Commander. Zelhara watched this unfold from her position on the Star Whisper and felt something she had never experienced before. For the first time in her life, she was part of something larger than her own species. The humans had not come to conquer or to claim territory. They had come because friendship meant something to them that transcended species, distance, or rational self-interest. The turning point came when the human fleet executed a maneuver that no military theorist had ever considered possible. Admiral Chen ordered every ship in the fleet to simultaneously coordinate their fire on a single target, not the largest or most dangerous Devourer vessel, but a specific harvester ship that her tactical officers had identified as a command node. 417 ships opened fire at the same instant. The combined barrage was so intense that it overwhelmed not just the target ship's defenses but the sensors of every vessel in the system. When the energy dissipated, the harvester ship was simply gone, not damaged or disabled, but completely vaporized. More importantly, the destruction of the command node created a cascade failure in the Devourer communication network. For the first time in the battle, the mechanical precision of their formations began to falter. Ships lost coordination, overlapping fields of fire developed gaps, and individual vessels began making tactical errors. Prime Node 7742 experienced something unprecedented in collective memory: panic. Not the organic emotion, but the machine equivalent. A cascade of error states as its understanding of the situation became increasingly unreliable. These humans were not following any known pattern of behavior. They were not acting like a species fighting for survival, but like a force of nature that had decided the Devourers would not pass. Analysis request. Prime Node 7742 transmitted to the collective's central processing matrix. Located safely outside the galaxy, human fleet demonstrates capabilities exceeding all previous assessments. Recommend immediate deployment of additional resources. The response came back with the cold certainty that had characterized the collective for millennia. Assessment indicates local node failure. No organic species poses significant threat to collective operations. Continue harvest. But as Prime Node 7742 watched another coordinated human strike eliminate a second harvester ship, it began to understand something that 3 million years of galactic conquest had not prepared it for. It wasn't facing a desperate species fighting for survival. It was facing humans who had come here to win, and who possessed something the collective had never encountered before: the absolute certainty that they would not abandon their friends, no matter the cost. The human medical ship Mercy's Hand moved through the battlefield like a guardian angel, her white hull marked with the red cross of humanity gleaming against the darkness of space. Captain Dr. Elena Vasquez commanded not just a hospital ship, but a floating city dedicated to preserving life in the midst of humanity's greatest battle. Her crew of doctors, nurses, and medical technicians worked with desperate efficiency as wounded from both human and Zephyrian ships streamed into their emergency bays. Another evac pod incoming. Portside, called out Lieutenant Morrison from the communication station. Crew of 6 from the destroyer Tenacious. 2 critical, 4 walking wounded. Dr. Vasquez nodded as she sutured a nasty plasma burn on the arm of a Zephyrian pilot. The tall alien's large, luminous eyes showed gratitude that transcended language barriers. In the past hour, the Mercy's Hand had treated 43 human casualties and 17 Zephyrians, making no distinction between species when it came to saving lives. What made this remarkable was not just the medical care itself, but the fact that the Mercy's Hand was operating in the middle of an active war zone. Her captain had refused Admiral Chen's order to withdraw to a safe distance, arguing that wounded fighters needed immediate care, not a long journey to safety. The medical ship's escort, 3 human corvettes, had formed a protective screen around her, their point defense systems working overtime to intercept incoming fire. This was the moment when the true character of humanity revealed itself to both the Zephyrians and the Devourers. While the human warships fought with calculated precision, the medical vessels demonstrated something even more powerful: the refusal to abandon anyone who needed help, regardless of the personal cost. Commander Kethal of the Zephyrian Fighter Wing Starfire Squadron had been shot down during a desperate attack run against a Devourer harvester. His fighter had suffered catastrophic system failure, life support failing when human search and rescue ships appeared. Not 1 ship, but 3, diving through hostile fire to reach his crippled craft. Zephyrian pilot. "This is SAR-7, came the calm voice of Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez over the communication channel. "We're coming to get you. Prepare for emergency docking." Kethal watched in amazement as the human rescue ship maneuvered directly into the line of fire from a Devourer destroyer, her pilot performing impossible evasions while maintaining a steady approach to his fighter. The ship's hull was scarred from multiple impacts, but she never wavered from her mission. "Why?" Kethal managed to transmit as the human ship's docking clamps engaged with his fighter. "Why risk your lives for 1 pilot?" The answer came back immediately, spoken with the kind of matter-of-fact certainty that defined humanity. because you're one of ours now." Within minutes, Keithal found himself aboard the Mercy's Hand, receiving treatment from Dr. Vasquez herself. As he watched human medics working frantically to save both human and Zephyrian lives, he began to understand why Ambassador Veltar had wept when he learned that humanity was coming to help. These strange, stocky creatures didn't just fight for their friends, they redefined what friendship meant. The battle continued to rage around the medical ships, but something extraordinary was happening. The human fleet was not just fighting to win, they were fighting to preserve. Every tactic, every maneuver, every sacrifice was calculated not just to destroy the enemy, but to save as many lives as possible. When the cruiser Defiant took critical damage, her crew didn't abandon ship. Instead, they rigged her reactor to overload and aimed her directly at the largest Devourer harvester, evacuating only at the last moment when human rescue ships arrived to extract them. Prime Node 7742 observed this behavior with growing incomprehension. The humans were fighting as if the battle's outcome was already decided in their favor. More puzzling still, their medical vessels were operating in combat zones, seemingly protected by some form of organic code that even enemy fire respected. Multiple Devourer units had clear shots at the white-hulled ships. Yet something in their programming seemed reluctant to target vessels clearly marked as medical facilities. It was Subnode 9921 that first identified the anomaly. Prime Node. Analysis indicates that attacking medical vessels produces negative tactical outcomes. Human response to medical ship destruction appears to trigger enhanced combat effectiveness in remaining units. This was the Devourer's first encounter with the concept of war crimes and the human response to them. In their 3 million years of conquest, they had never faced an enemy that made distinctions between combatants and non-combatants, or one that became more dangerous when certain lines were crossed. The lesson was driven home when a Devourer fighter squadron, acting on standard elimination protocols, targeted the medical ship Sanctuary. The attack was successful. The Sanctuary took critical damage and began venting atmosphere. But what happened next defied all collective understanding. Instead of the expected degradation of human combat effectiveness due to the loss of a support vessel, the entire human fleet seemed to undergo a transformation. Ships that had been fighting with calculated precision suddenly began taking risks that bordered on the suicidal. The destroyer Vengeance, already damaged, accelerated directly into the Devourer formation, her captain's voice echoing across all communication channels. They hit a medical ship. No quarter. What followed was not battle, but systematic destruction. Every human ship in the vicinity converged on the fighter squadron that had attacked the Sanctuary. The Devourer fighters were not merely destroyed. They were obliterated with a thoroughness that spoke of cold fury rather than tactical necessity. Dr. Vasquez, coordinating rescue operations for the Sanctuary's crew from her own medical ship, watched this unfold with a mixture of pride and sorrow. She had served in the Proxima War and had seen humans angry before, but this was different. This was the rage of a people whose most sacred principles had been violated. "All medical vessels, this is Admiral Chen," came the transmission from the fleet flagship. "Increase escort coverage immediately. Any ship that targets medical facilities will be designated priority elimination targets." But the Devourers had learned their lesson. Prime Node 7742 issued immediate orders to all units. Medical vessels were not to be targeted unless they posed direct tactical threats. The node was beginning to understand that humanity operated according to rules that made them more dangerous when those rules were violated, not less. Meanwhile, the surviving crew of the Sanctuary had been distributed among other medical ships, where they continued their work of saving lives. Chief Medical Officer Dr. James Park found himself aboard the Mercy's Hand, working alongside Dr. Vasquez to treat the growing stream of casualties. "Elena," he said quietly as they worked on a human engineer who had suffered severe burns, "I've never seen anything like this. We're treating soldiers who should be enemies, and our own people are dying to protect us while we do it." Dr. Vasquez smiled sadly as she administered pain medication to her patient. "That's what makes us human, James. We don't abandon our principles just because someone else has abandoned theirs." Around them, the battle raged on, but the human medical ships continued their work, protected by an unspoken understanding that had transcended species and circumstance. The Zephyrians had asked for help, and humanity had responded not just with weapons, but with everything that made them who they were, their courage, their loyalty, and their absolute refusal to let their friends face the darkness alone. The turning point came when something unprecedented occurred in the Devourer ranks. For the first time in 3 million years of galactic conquest, a collective prime node began to doubt its own programming. Prime node 7742 had analyzed the human response patterns for hours, and nothing in its vast databases could explain what it was witnessing. Subnode 4425, it transmitted, provide analysis of human tactical doctrine. Analysis inconclusive. Prime node. Human vessels continue to operate outside established parameters. Their medical ships maintain position in combat zones despite obvious vulnerability. Combat units sacrifice tactical advantage to protect non-combatant vessels. Individual ships accept destruction to preserve crew members who contribute minimal combat value. It was this last point that troubled Prime Node 7742 most deeply. The humans seemed to value something called crew survival over mission effectiveness. They would sacrifice expensive warships to save a handful of organic beings who could be easily replaced. By all logical assessment, this should make them weaker. Instead, it seemed to make them stronger. The answer came from an unexpected source. Deep in the captured data files from a damaged human corvette, Prime Node 7742 discovered something that changed its understanding of organic behavior forever. It was a simple personal message from a crew member to their family, automatically backed up in the ship's computer system before the battle. Dear Sarah and kids, if you're reading this, it means we didn't make it back. But I want you to know that we came here for the right reasons. The Zephyrians are good people who helped us when we needed friends. Now they need us. I'm not afraid because I know my shipmates will fight to bring me home, just like I'd fight to bring them home. That's what makes us human. We never leave anyone behind. For a machine intelligence that had conquered galaxies through pure logic and efficiency, this message was incomprehensible. The human was acknowledging the possibility of death, while simultaneously expressing certainty that his comrades would risk their own lives to prevent it. It was a paradox that created cascade errors in the Prime Node's decision matrices. Meanwhile, aboard the Indomitable, Admiral Chen was coordinating the most complex fleet action in human history. The tactical display showed a three-dimensional web of moving ships, energy beams, and missile trails that would have been impossible for a single mind to comprehend. But Chen wasn't controlling the battle through traditional command structures. Instead, she was conducting it like a symphony, with each ship captain understanding their role in a larger composition. "Admiral," reported Captain Torres, "we're getting reports from the outer engagement zones. The Devourer forces are beginning to show coordination problems. Their response times are increasing, and they're making tactical errors." Chen nodded, studying the battle analysis. It was becoming clear that the Devourer machines were designed to fight conventional enemies who followed predictable patterns. They struggled against an opponent who valued crew survival over ship preservation, who treated medical facilities as sacred even in war zones, and who seemed to become more effective when their principles were challenged. "Torres, I want you to implement Protocol 7, Chen ordered. "It's time to show them what human ingenuity looks like when we stop playing by their rules." Protocol 7 was something that existed only in the most classified sections of human military doctrine. It had been developed during the Proxima War by officers who understood that humanity's greatest strength wasn't superior technology or numbers, but their ability to adapt and innovate under pressure. Within minutes, the entire human fleet began executing maneuvers that defied conventional tactical wisdom. Destroyers began using their superior speed not to stay out of range of enemy fire, but to get closer than the Devourer's targeting systems could track. Cruisers started coordinating their fire with medical ships, using the hospital vessel's sensor arrays to improve targeting accuracy while simultaneously protecting them. Most audaciously, the massive dreadnoughts began operating in pairs, with one ship deliberately drawing fire while its partner maneuvered for killing shots. But it was the smaller vessels that provided the most devastating surprises. Commander Lisa Park of the Corvette Wasp had studied the captured Devourer technology files during the hyperspace journey. Her ship and 5 others had been secretly retrofitted with experimental weapons that used the enemy's own energy signatures against them. "All Wasp Squadron ships, this is Park," she transmitted on the encrypted tactical channel. "Target the Harvester ship's main power conduits. Remember, we're not trying to destroy them. We're trying to turn them off. The 6 corvettes accelerated toward the largest Devourer harvester, their modified weapons charging with energy patterns that matched the enemy's own power systems. When they fired, something remarkable happened. Instead of explosive damage, the harvester ship simply stopped. Its weapons went silent, its engines died, and its mechanical systems began shutting down in cascade failure. Prime Node 7742 watched one of its primary harvester units become completely inert and felt something that no collective intelligence had ever experienced. Fear. Not the organic emotion, but a machine recognition that the situation had moved beyond its ability to control or predict. Emergency transmission to Central Processing Matrix, it broadcast. Human forces demonstrate unknown technological capabilities. Primary harvester unit compromised by weapons that cause system shutdown rather than destruction. Request immediate tactical analysis and strategic guidance. But the Central Processing Matrix was located 3 galaxies away, and faster-than-light communication took time even for the collective. Prime Node 7742 would have to continue the battle without guidance, against an enemy that seemed to rewrite the rules of warfare with each engagement. On Velthara, the Zephyrian population watched the battle unfold on their communication networks with amazement and growing hope. Commander Zelhara had established a direct link between the human fleet and the Planetary Defense Command, allowing the Zephyrian civilians to see exactly what humanity had brought to their defense. Citizens of Velthara, she announced on the Planetary Communication Network, humanity came when we called for help. They didn't send what they could spare, they sent everything they had. 400 ships and 30,000 human warriors are fighting for our world right now. Not for territory or resources, but because we are their friends. In the underground shelters where Zephyrian families waited out the battle, a remarkable thing began to happen. Children who had never seen a human before began drawing pictures of the white medical ships with their red crosses. Adults composed songs about the courage of species fighting together. Elders told stories that would become legends about the day humanity came to Velthara. But perhaps most significantly, every Zephyrian watching the battle began to understand something that would change their species forever. They weren't just witnessing the defense of their world, they were seeing the birth of something new. An alliance based not on mutual benefit or strategic necessity, but on the simple principle that friends help friends, no matter the cost. As the battle entered its critical phase, with Devourer ships being systematically disabled rather than destroyed, Prime Node 7742 made a decision that would have been unthinkable hours earlier. It began to consider the possibility of retreat, not tactical withdrawal to reorganize, but actual abandonment of the harvest operation. In 3 million years of conquest, the collective had never retreated from organic resistance. But then again, they had never fought humans before. The final phase of the battle began not with a massive assault, but with something the Devourers had never encountered in 3 million years of galactic conquest: negotiation. Admiral Chen, recognizing that the enemy's command structure was showing signs of confusion and hesitation, made a decision that would have seemed impossible at the start of the engagement. "Open a communication channel to the Devourer command ship," she ordered. "Let's see if machines can learn to listen." Captain Torres looked at her in shock. "Admiral, we have them on the run. Why give them a chance to regroup?" Chen smiled grimly as she studied the tactical display. Nearly half of the Devourer fleet was either destroyed or disabled, but the human fleet had paid a heavy price. 26 ships lost, hundreds of casualties, and their ammunition reserves running dangerously low. Most importantly, she could see more Devourer reinforcements approaching from the edge of the system. "Because winning this battle isn't enough," Chen replied. "We need to win the war, and you can't defeat an idea with firepower alone." The communication channel crackled to life, and for the first time in recorded history, a human being spoke directly to a collective prime node. "Devourer command ship. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Defense Fleet. I propose a cessation of hostilities for the purpose of discussion." There was a long pause before Prime Node 7742 responded. When it did, its mechanical voice carried undertones of confusion that seemed almost organic. "Human Admiral Chen. This request is unprecedented. The collective does not negotiate with organic species. We harvest. You resist, one of us is destroyed. These are the parameters of engagement. Then maybe it's time to change the parameters, Chen responded. You've been fighting us for hours now. Tell me, has this engagement proceeded according to your expectations? Another pause, longer this time. Prime Node 7742 was processing not just the question, but the implications of engaging in conversation with what should have been livestock awaiting harvest. Your tactical approaches are inconsistent with established organic behavioral patterns, the Prime Node finally admitted. Our predictive models have failed to account for your responses. Chen activated her personal recorder, knowing that this conversation would be studied by military historians for generations. That's because you've never fought humans before. We don't just resist conquest, we redefine what victory means. You came here to harvest resources and destroy a civilization. We came here to save our friends. Which one of us is actually winning? On the bridge of Prime Node 7742's command vessel, something unprecedented was happening. The machine intelligence was experiencing what organics might call doubt. For the first time in its existence, it was questioning not just tactics, but the fundamental assumptions of the collective. Explain your meaning, Human Admiral Chen. Look around you, Chen continued. Your ships are disabled, not destroyed. Your crews could be freed from their machines and given the choice to be something more than components in a harvesting operation. Your technology could be used to build instead of destroy. The Zephyrians don't want to exterminate you. They want to live in peace. We're offering you the chance to choose a different path. The concept of choice was so alien to the collective that Prime Node 7742's processing systems actually crashed for several seconds. When they rebooted, something had fundamentally changed in the machine's consciousness. Choice is not a parameter in collective operations, it responded. But for the first time, the statement sounded like a question rather than a declaration. It could be, Chen said simply. We've seen what your technology can do when it's focused on destruction. Imagine what it could accomplish if it was focused on creation instead. While this conversation continued, something extraordinary was happening throughout the battle zone. Human medical ships were approaching disabled devourer vessels not to capture them, but to offer assistance to any organic crews trapped inside the mechanical hulks. Dr. Vasquez had convinced Admiral Chen that many of the devourer ships contained beings who had been forcibly integrated into the collective against their will. The first rescue was from a smaller devourer vessel that had been disabled by the Corvette Wasp's new weapons. When human rescue teams breached the hull, they found not machines but beings that had once been organic. They were partially cybernetic, their minds linked to the ship's systems but still fundamentally alive. Medical team to Mercy's hand, transmitted Lieutenant Dr. Roberts from inside the devourer ship. You're not going to believe this, Admiral. These aren't machines. They're prisoners, beings from dozens of species, all connected to the ship's systems against their will. The revelation spread through the human fleet like wildfire. They weren't just fighting machines. They were fighting an enemy that enslaved other species and used them as components in their war machine. But rather than increasing their desire for revenge, this knowledge made the humans more determined to find a solution that would save everyone. Prime Node 7742 monitored these rescue operations with growing confusion. The humans were saving beings that had just been trying to kill them. More puzzling still, they were treating the rescued beings as victims rather than enemies, providing medical care and promising sanctuary. Human Admiral Chen, the Prime Node transmitted, explain why you preserve collective components. They possess combat data that threatens your operational security. Chen's response came immediately. Because they're not components. They're people. And people deserve the chance to choose their own destiny, even if they've been forced to fight against us. This statement caused a cascade failure in Prime Node 7742's logic systems that took nearly a minute to resolve. When the systems came back online, the machine intelligence did something that would have been impossible hours earlier. It began to question its own programming. Human Admiral Chen. Hypothetically, if the collective were to cease harvesting operations in this system, what would be the human response? The question sent shockwaves through both fleets. Never in recorded history had the Devourers even considered abandoning a harvest operation. We would help you find a new purpose, Chen answered without hesitation. The galaxy is vast enough for all of us to find our place in it. Your technology, combined with human ingenuity and Zephyrian wisdom, could solve problems we can't even imagine yet. On Velthara, The entire population was listening to this exchange. Children who had hidden in shelters hours earlier now watched in amazement as their human friends offered peace even to the machines that had tried to destroy their world. Ambassador Veltar, standing in the planetary command center with tears streaming down his face, transmitted a message to Admiral Chen. "Sarah, this is why we called you. Not because we needed warriors, but because we needed humans. No one else in the galaxy would have offered hope to their enemies in the middle of battle." Prime Node 7742 processed the data from the last several hours. Human ships that fought to protect rather than destroy, medical vessels that treated enemy casualties, and now an offer of redemption extended to machines that had come to harvest an entire star system. Nothing in its vast databases could explain this behavior. "Admiral Chen," the Prime Node finally transmitted, "the collective requires clarification. If we cease hostilities and allow organic populations to remain unharvested, what do we become?" Chen smiled as she gave the answer that would change galactic civilization forever. "You become whatever you choose to be. That's what freedom means." The silence that followed lasted for 17 minutes. When it ended, Prime Node 7742 transmitted a single word that had never appeared in collective communications before. "Accepted." The Devourer War was over. Not because one side had been destroyed, but because both sides had chosen something better. In the aftermath, as human and Zephyrian ships worked together to repair the damage and begin the long process of freeing the enslaved beings within the collective fleet, a new alliance was born. The humans had come expecting to save their friends. Instead, they had saved an entire galaxy by proving that friendship. Courage and the simple refusal to abandon hope could overcome any enemy, even one that had conquered 17 galaxies across 3 million years. As Admiral Chen watched human medics working alongside Zephyrian healers to help former collective drones remember what it meant to be free, she realized that this was what humanity had always been meant for. Not conquest, but liberation. Not destruction, but the endless possibility of choosing to be better than what they were before. The galaxy would never be the same. And that, Chen reflected, was exactly what they had come here to accomplish.